I'm realizing for you YouTubers, one of the side effects of having a shared recording account is that we got to make sure that our settings line up. Myself, the great Noah Rubin, the great Adam King, who'll be starting his show really any day now. Stuff It! That's what it's called. This show is Old Man Squad Fantasy Basketball. I'm Dan Besbris. We are continuing our journey through the end of season ranks. And today, I want to focus on the second round. The second round is a constant area of spite and ire. But should it be? Is the question we're going to try to answer today. And I don't know that there's a final answer on this, but we're going to do our best to look at a chunk of players, those basically with a starting rank between 13 and 24, and then a little bit of wiggle room on either side. And we're going to figure out, does the second round suck as much as it feels like? Because for years, the prevailing thought, myself included, by the way, I don't have the answer to this question yet. I like to go into these shows not knowing where we're going to go. That's the offseason at play. Regular season, draft season, we have a very set schedule. We have a calendar. We're going to gut through all this stuff. Offseason, we're floating through data. And we're floating through it together. So there will be moments where I realize something in the middle of the show. It's quite genuine. So this year, and we have a couple seasons of data on this. I've pulled up last year as well. You guys will be able to see all of them categorized in some capacity. Whoa, that was before I started separating things and color coding things. That was 2 years ago. Where are the names? Hello, names. There they are. All right, so that's 2 years, or that's 3 years ago, because remember, one season got wiped out due to a hard drive malfunction. But let's start with this year. No reason for me to go bouncing around right out of the chute. I would encourage you all to please hit subscribe if you're brand new to the proceedings. We have a lot of really cool shows that are coming here on Old Man Squad Sports Network. This year, if we'll start at number 10, let's just go a little bit early. 10 was James Harden. We'll go through 30, basically, just so you guys have a little wiggle room on both sides. Maybe we don't need to go quite that far. It went Harden, Anthony Edwards, Joel Embiid. That technically was the end of the first round. Steph Curry, Donovan Mitchell, LaMelo Ball was 13, 14, 15. Cat was 16. Scotty Barnes, 17. Jalen Brunson, 18. Devin Booker, 19. Kyrie Irving, 20. Kevin Durant, 21. Domantas Sabonis, 22. Tyrese Maxey, 23. Dame was 24. Chet, 25. LeBron, 26. De'Aaron Fox, 27. And Lauri Markkanen, 28. And that's probably about as far as we need to go. Although, I'll give you guys a sneak preview, we are going to inch just a little bit farther as we start to kind of look and see what all these numbers mean. So this year, just starting with James Harden, who started at 10, finished at 16, only missed by 6. This is per game, by the way, because totals he actually beat that ADP of 10. Anthony Edwards, also relatively close. Joel Embiid, no, terrible. Finished at 53. That's a miss by almost 4 rounds. Steph Curry, right on the nose. Donovan Mitchell, off by 20. Not great, but not backbreakingly bad. LaMelo was awful, 40 slots off, just like Joel Embiid. Cat was pretty close, only missed by 9. Scotty Barnes missed by 40. Jalen Brunson by 30. Devin Booker by 10. Kyrie by 8. Durant by 8. Sabonis, 0, right on the money. Maxey, 15. Dame, 15. Chet, 27. LeBron, 8. De'Aaron Fox, 12. And if you go to Lauri Markkanen, then you get a 62 mixed in there. What does this tell us? Well, if we're starting at kind of the tail end of the first round, you'd have to go back one slot earlier even to Trae Young, who had a starting rank of 9 and finished at 49. But for the fact that he was mostly healthy this year, that also would have been one of the worst straight-up picks in fantasy basketball. Luckily, he's more of a punt-something guy, which would push him back up towards the second round. We are going to be looking at the absolute value average, or the absolute value per 10, either column X or column Z if you're looking at us with us on YouTube. If you're not, don't worry, I'm going to say the numbers as we go through because this is a traditional simulcast. However, Before we did that, it behooves me to remind you all that Bet Online is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for all sports betting action. Yes, baseball season is in full swing, but who cares because you've got the NBA playoffs to bet on, and the road teams all won again. That was crazy. But Steph Curry went down, and he's going to miss at least a week for the Warriors. So that really mucks things up. But tonight on the docket, Boston, 10.5-point favorite at home after getting upset in overtime by the New York Knicks. Denver, 10-point underdog at Oklahoma City after stealing game one. That was on Monday as a 10.5-point underdog. Boston went up. They were an 8.5-point favorite that went up to 10.5. There's some stuff in these games that you could point back to and just be like, hey, that's not a thing that's probably going to happen again. The Boston game, Kristaps Porzingis leaving with illness, the Celtics shooting 35% for the ball game, just an absolutely atrocious shooting game for Boston. These are things that you can point at and say, yeah, I mean, that's not going to happen again. You can point the Knicks side and say they're not going to be that bad at the free throw line again. But again, most of their misses were Mitchell Robinson, who is actually very bad at free throw shooting. You could definitely look at the Knicks and say these are just like, this team is not going to shoot that great and maybe got a little bit lucky. So I think you could make a better argument for Boston to be a wise big favorite than OKC, who you can't stop Nikola Jokic. There are two guys in the NBA that can stop Nikola Jokic, and they just went through the team that had one of them. OKC ain't going to stop him. I mean, I don't see Denver getting blown out. They're just not a team that gets blown out in games, are they? I mean, maybe they take their foot off the gas after stealing game one, but maybe not. So if you want to get down on any of that stuff, head on to Bet Online. They've got the largest selection of odds on everything from baseball, NBA, we just talked about, hockey, UFC. And if you can't wait for the ball games to start, head to the Bet Online casino with all the top Vegas-style games, including poker, live slots, blackjack, and more. Bet Online, the game starts here. Pivoting back again to this season, if you start with Trae Young and you work your way through the sort of absolute value average, the miss size at Trae Young is, 5.5, but that doesn't really tell us all that much stuff. If we extend it and we look at basically, a chunk of plays, we almost needed like an absolute value per 5 to really get a narrow window there. It jumps up at Trae Young. It hovers stationary for a couple of picks, as we mentioned, Harden and Edwards were actually relatively accurate picks this year. Jumps at Embiid, jumps a little bit at Donovan Mitchell, jumps at LaMelo Ball, jumps at Scotty Barnes, jumps at Jalen Brunson, and then stops jumping. In fact, after Jalen Brunson, and now I'm looking at the absolute value average or the absolute value per 10 average, basically, the last 10, at Devin Booker, if you're just looking at the absolute value average, it goes down 1, 2, 3, 4 names in a row, and then basically hovers stationary for another 2 names before jumping up at Chet and then coming down 2 in a row again. And this would be relatively easy to look at if you just see the differences between the names. Like, is the difference more or less than the starting rank of that player? That's how you're going to know if the average went up or not, because it's now being divided by that number. And the only player between Jalen Brunson and Lauri Markkanen that actually pushes the average back up in any meaningful way was Chet Holmgren. Tyrese Maxey, Damian Lillard, they moved it up a little bit because I said something wrong there. It has to be bigger than the current average, basically. Was only Chet Holmgren, and probably wouldn't have been the case if not for his nasty, nasty injury early in the year. So actually, picks 19 through 29, which I realize extends from the middle of the second round to the middle of the third round, were extraordinarily accurate in starting rank. And so when you look at the second round and we say, the second round is a mess, and a lot of times it is a mess. And Josh was on this show and he had an expression that I thought was funny, so I've been repeating it, which is the second round is basically just, after the first round, you have 20 third rounders in a row. That's a funny and relatively accurate way to describe it. The problem is someone's are going to have to make picks between 10 and 20. And you're just trying your damn best not to pick the stupid names. I'm realizing now that my face on YouTube is actually covering up a little bit of what we're talking about. So I'll fix that and then we'll continue. What if, moving Embiid from 12 to 25 still makes him a bad pick, but it doesn't have quite the same impact on the average here. Moving LaMelo Ball from 15 down to 25. All these things, they do matter. There's a reason why the guys from 19 to 29 are more accurate. And it's because, again, like basically all of these dudes are third rounders. And the question is, who has a draft pick closer to the third round? It's another reason why getting first, second, third, fourth overall pick is so damn important, because you're not missing out on that much. Like sometimes, Steph was good to get at 13. Cat would have been an advantage if you got him at 14, 15, 16, something like that. But a lot of these guys, like if you took Donovan Mitchell, which I did in one league, if you took Donovan Mitchell at 14 or 15, you didn't get any advantage over the guy who took Dame at 24. I ended up with Dame in a bunch of spots. Now, admittedly, he missed the end of the season with the blood clot, but up until that point, Dame was winning that battle. KD was winning that battle. Like the team that started with Wemby or Nikola Jokic that got Dame or Kevin Durant or LeBron James or whoever at the end of the second round, beginning of the third, they may have even had another advantage. But we don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole because we're just talking about one season right now. What can we say from this one season? What can we conclude just on one packet of data? This year, and I think even as I say it out loud, we sort of already know that there are going to be other seasons that parallel it. This year, having a pick between 9 and the end of the first round sucked. If you got Harden, you probably survived it. If you had Steph, you probably survived it. If you had Ant, you were probably okay. If you ended up with Cat, you were probably okay. If you tumbled Wiener first into Trae Young or Joel Embiid or Donovan Mitchell or LaMelo Ball or Scotty Barnes, yeah, probably had a little bit of a tougher time. Again, I think you could survive Trae because he was mostly healthy. You could survive Donovan Mitchell because he wasn't that bad and he was mostly healthy. But, like, there were some real turds in there. Real turds. But to categorize the second round as bad, I think is perhaps too broad. Just looking again at this year alone, the first half of the second round was a pain in the butt. But the back end of the second round was totally fine. After Jalen Brunson, Devin Booker, small miss, but he was fine. Kyrie, until he got hurt, was very good. Kevin Durant, same story. Domantas Sabonis, reliable. Oh, reliable. Tyrese Maxey, big year because his whole team was dead. Dame was chugging along before his DVT. LeBron was good again. De'Aaron Fox was fine, but not great. Chet was the only one that really sunk you. Injury and then kind of holding him down. Okay, is this then a claim that we can make over a more extended period of time? That's the thing we'd like to know. Is this a recurring instance where it's not just necessarily that the second round sucks, but it's the beginning of the second round that sucks? So let's go back to last year. Those of you that are watching on YouTube, you just saw me flip over to 23-24. Last year, the top 10 was actually strikingly accurate. Steph was like probably the worst one in there. Dame had a down year, but that was okay. Last year, the trouble, if you want to call it that, didn't really pick up until more the back half of the second round in kind of a weird little twist. But even then, it wasn't as markedly bad throughout as this season was. Looking at last year, Dame at 10 was a medium size miss. LaMelo Ball, obviously he was hurt, but his per game numbers were actually better last year than this year. Anthony Davis was fine. Kyrie missed some games, but overall he was fine. Anthony Edwards was like a 2-round miss, but your team survived because he was super healthy. Domantas Sabonis, small miss, but again, super healthy. Booker was an easy pick. Trae Young was actually better last year because his percentages weren't quite so bad. Donovan Mitchell was fine. And it was actually at pick 19 last year, Mikal Bridges, where the wheels came off. Because then JJJ had a down season. Cat had a down season last year. And then it kind of gets back into being okay again until you get all the way down to Pascal Siakam at 29 last year. So last season, I would argue the second round really wasn't that bad at all. Second round was kind of fine. Yes, Mikal Bridges in there really tipped the scales a little bit, but like if you're looking at just the numbers around him, Mikal being sort of like the big one, there wasn't any pick this year in the top 2 rounds that missed by 70. Mikal Bridges was had an ADP of 19 last year, and he finished at 70 or 91. Ugh. Nobody in the first 2 rounds this year finished at 91. In fact, if you go from 24 up, the worst per game finish was Scotty Barnes at 57. So there was no one, just from just a straight handicapping standpoint, that was as bad as Mikal Bridges last year. It's why the per game numbers jumped so much last season, was that one thing. But again, if you're looking at the first 24 names this year, the live absolute value average is listed as 12.42. If you're looking at the first 24 names last year, the average was 13.25, which is a tiny bit higher, yes. But if you remove Mikal Bridges, or just like bring him down by a half, which is effectively, what we did with most of the names this year, then last year drops to 11.75. Better in accuracy than this year. But of course, we can't take Mikal Bridges out. He was a colossal miss last season. Possibly the worst pick in fantasy basketball last year. To get a second rounder that just, yeah, he played a lot, but like 8th round per game? That's crazy. That was bad. But what we can see by looking at last year is the front end of the second round isn't always a colossal dumpster fire. And in fact, I would argue that the second round really wasn't that bad last year. It wasn't. Was the third round terrible last year? You would argue the misses were a little bit more significant in the third round. The end of the third round last year had some pretty big misses. But overall, I would actually say that last year's Yahoo ranks and ADPs were pretty good. Pascal Siakam, Mikal Bridges, and then sadly, Cade and Jaylen Brown and Darius Garland. But now you're getting down into the late 30s and 40s. So no, it's not consistent. And I don't want us going into next year's draft just assuming that the second round is going to be a huge collection of landmines. Because if you really, now let's look back at, actually, before we look back at this season, let's look at the year before. And it doesn't actually matter what the names are here, but we're going to zoom in on the averages side. You guys are getting more than you bargained for here. Come on, Dan. Can we not zoom to selection? There we go. Okay, that's better. I'm going to lose track of where I'm at. So that's 20. This is harder to read. I wasn't as organized last year as I had or 3 seasons back as I got by last season. Here's the thing. At the end of the second round, 3 years back, the average miss size was only 9.83. It was very accurate again. Other than, who is this name that was a 58 miss? Who's in row 16 that we're going to have to try to figure out here? Whoa, Dano, you're screwing everything up. That was Bradley Beal. Beal, you turd. And then as you get into the early third round, Russell Westbrook and Michael Porter Jr. were the 2 guys that were train wrecks 3 years ago. But again, like, other than Bradley Beal, the first and second round 3 years ago, Yahoo nailed it. Freaking nailed it. 9.83. That's amazing work by the pre-ranks. Rudy Gobert, Devin Booker. That's great work by the pre-ranks 3 years ago. So what is the takeaway here? Yes, I mean, Bradley Beal was terrible in that one, but he was a little bit by himself. And then you had some kind of medium-sized misses towards the end of the second round that did jump that number up a little. That was Sabonis, Bam Adebayo, Zach LaVine. Those guys were like medium-sized. But again, your team can handle a miss by 2 rounds. What your team can handle is like Beal, a miss by 5 rounds. Mikal Bridges, a miss by 6 in the early going. Is there anything from looking at this stuff, and these numbers go all the way back to COVID years and before, so let's come back to this season, at least just for now. Is there anything that we can say from looking at the numbers this year, last year, 3 seasons back? Curse you, hardware failure, because I'd love to have the 22-23 numbers to punch in there as well. Is there anything that we can say definitively is right or wrong with the second round? I think the answer is no. I think the answer, as we look at what's gone wrong with second round picks or even late first round picks over the last half decade, this year, what went wrong with Trae Young? His field goal percent was way worse than expected. Is that where we're at with Trae? Because you kind of knew you were going to get an awful field goal percent. The question you were asking yourself was, how awful was it? Otherwise, he kind of did what you expected. 24 points, 3 threes, 11.5 assists, 1.2 steals. You drafted Trae Young knowing what you were getting. And yeah, he wasn't going to be a great 9-cat play, and you definitely should not have drafted him early if you're in a 9-cat roto league. But in a head-to-head league, you drafted him, and your team build was basically just laid out before you. What about Joel Embiid? Okay, well, that was, high risk, high reward kind of thing. Probably shouldn't have done that in any head-to-head league either. I did take him in one roto league, as you guys saw when we went over some of my teams 3 weeks ago, and that team didn't do well. LaMelo Ball, much like Trae Young, you knew what you were getting into with the punts. How could you avoid a miss there? Well, I mean, with him, there's the injury stuff. What about Scotty Barnes and Jalen Brunson and Donovan Mitchell? Those, to me, are the more interesting of the 3. How could we have known that Donovan Mitchell, Scotty Barnes, and Jalen Brunson were going to have down seasons from a 9-cat standpoint? With Brunson, I think that one was a pretty straightforward one because the Knicks had other people on the team, which they didn't have at the end of last year. He was drafted based on basically the last 2 months of last year, which, as you guys might recall, he was top 20, but he was taking 24 shots per game. Far and away, well, top 2 in the NBA. Luka Doncic was at 24 also over that stretch. Luka was number 4, by the way. If you're taking 24 shots a game, you should be a first rounder. But that tells you with Jalen Brunson, there are just parts of his fantasy game that are never going to come around. He's never going to be a big rebounder. He's never going to be a big defensive stats guy. And without those things, it's hard for him to crack the top 20 consistently unless he's taking 25 damn shots a game. So that one was a pretty easy one. I think we were able to isolate and eliminate. How about Donovan Mitchell and Scotty Barnes? With Barnes, also, I think a little bit easier to say this is one where I'm not ready to take the plunge. He had this huge leap in fantasy stat set last year. So if you go back to his rookie and sophomore seasons in the NBA, he averaged exactly 15.3 points both times. His shooting was fine, hovered between about 45 and 50%. Career, he's at 46.6. Didn't take or make many three-pointers, mid-70s in free throws. He was at 7.5 rebounds his first year, 6.5 the second year. Assists were between 3.5 and 5. Turnovers were around 2. Steals were at 1.1. Blocks were at 0.7. Second year, blocks didn't really change. Actually, nothing really changed. In fact, his rebounds went down a tiny bit, his assists went up. He had slightly more playmaking. Last year, we knew there was going to be a big usage jump for him. He went from 13 shots a game to almost 16. Field goal percent was right about where you expected. 3-point percent actually inched up, which you could kind of go, okay. Free throw was also a career high. Rebounds were a career high by a bunch, even though his minutes didn't change all that much. Assists went up a bunch, but you could pin that on the higher usage. And then you get to steals and blocks. 2.8 combined with no real change in minutes per game. It went up from 1.9 to 2.8. That was the single largest, even over the extra points and assists, change in Scottie Barnes' fantasy game. So coming into this year, I was very skeptical that the steals and blocks would stay as high as they were. And they didn't. The blocks came down by a half a block per ball game, which I realize doesn't sound like that much, but over an entire season, 40 blocks is a big deal. Like, that's a week's worth of blocks for your entire fantasy team. Rebounds came back down a little bit, which, I mean, some of that was just playing a couple minutes less, injury, things like that. Field goal percent came down because the 3-point percent was back, these sort of random fluctuations back low. I think looking towards next year, you could probably draft Scottie Barnes, assuming the field goal percent is a little bit better than it was this year, but it's unclear how much exactly, and then hope that everything else stays about where it was. I think the one that, to me at least, was the hardest one to see coming was the big Donovan Mitchell drop-off. Because Donovan Mitchell went from a late first-rounder with slight injury concerns to a third-rounder who was strikingly healthy this past year. He played in 71 out of 82 regular season games. That's solid. That's right on league average. The big drop-off for Donovan Mitchell, his team didn't need him to play 36 minutes a game. It was even lower than Utah minutes, and they were trying to keep him in check. So the points per game down from 28 or 27 down to 24. Steals down from 1.5 to 1.3. Although last year he had a big spike in steals up to 1.8. That was always a number that felt like maybe it was running a bit on the hot side. Rebounds down from 6 to 5, or assists, 6 to 5. Rebounds from 5 to 4.5. Threes stayed exactly the same somehow. I don't know why the free throw number was down to 82. He'd been around 85, 86 for about 5 years in a row. But again, like the big thing for Donovan Mitchell, he played 10% less basketball. And all of his I'm on the floor stats went down by 10%. Or a little bit more than that in some cases. And if you look towards the future, this, like, as long as the Cavs are good, they don't want him playing 35 minutes a game. Sure enough, if you want to look at, like, postseason Donovan Mitchell, competitive basketball games, he's going to play 36 minutes a game. They steamrolled Miami, so he didn't have to do it. But, like, yesterday in a close game against Indiana, he played 36 minutes a game. And you got old school Donovan Mitchell. Admittedly, there was no Darius Garland, among others, but that was Donovan Mitchell playing a whole bunch. He's not going to average 48 points. So there are things we can look at and things that we can learn from this, but it's not necessarily about the second round as a whole, but rather, why did the players in the second round miss? Why did those that missed miss? Why were the other ones more accurate? Is there something we can do instead? If you don't like Donovan Mitchell at 14 and you don't like LaMelo Ball and you don't like Scottie Barnes and Jalen Brunson and Cat and Steph are off the board, what do? You don't want to take the injury risk on Kyrie Irving. You don't want to take the injury risk on Kevin Durant. You go all the way down and go some Domantas Sabonis who's pre-ranked 22 with your pick 15. Do you just take a guy thinking, I'm probably going to, like, this dude is probably going to be 7-8 slots back, but I actually think that's better than the other guys? The answer there is yes, believe it or not. Dame and Tyrese Maxey ended up as wins, so you could also argue you could go Dame, but, like, he missed a bunch of time, so did Tyrese Maxey. You could go LeBron, but dude's 40. What is he going to be? Dude is 40. And the rest of these guys, I mean, Cade is going to go earlier than he was, especially in punt builds, but, like, what do you do there? What if Donovan Mitchell was off the table? Who's the next one you would go to? Is it Maxey? Is it Dame? Is it LeBron? Is it Cade? Is it Jalen Williams? Like, looking down the board, is it Jalen Johnson? I think the lesson from the second round this year, previous seasons, whatever, and we can go back to last year and try to figure out what the hell happened, but I'll admit I don't remember. Like Dame, I know why Dame had a down year last season is because his field goal percent was down. And like, why did Anthony Edwards have a down year? He was just not a guy that was taking that leap yet. Mikal Bridges, JJJ, Cat. I mean, this is more easy to handicap. So now we'll look towards next year. We'll figure out who the hell ends up in this, 9 through 27 corridor. And we're going to do a better job of isolating the fact that, odds are like 2/3 of those guys are probably going to be misses. Or negatives, I should say. Because even if you look back at last year on Yahoo, when they did better, most of the misses were on the negative side. Because it's hard for all of these guys to beat their ADP when you're that close to the top of the board. Even the ones that were pretty close were typically small misses. More than other. Like if we look at last year, starting at KD at 9, it was negative, 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 positive, positive, negative, negative, nothing, negative, positive, negative, 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 positive, negative. I've lost track. That was 10 negatives and like 4 positives. And you go a little farther, there's a couple more positives. Odds are you're going to have more than 50% that miss on the wrong side. What about this year? Let's do this. Let's count it out together again. We'll count from Trae Young down to, I'm not going to do Lowry because that was where things got really funky. But all right, it goes Trae, Harden, Ant, Embiid. Ooh, Steph was a positive. Donovan, LaMelo, Cat, Barnes, Brunson, Booker, Kyrie, Durant, Sabonis, Maxey, Dame, Chet, LeBron, De'Aaron Fox. 12-7. 12-7, negative over positive. There, we actually did that one together. 2/3 is probably too high of an estimate, but one would assume that it's somewhere around 60, somewhere between 60 and 70% are probably going to be misses on the negative side. And that's just by nature of having an ADP in the early going. It doesn't mean that they're all bad picks. The key is if you assume, especially if you have like pick 16 and 3 or 4 of the guys that you think might have been a positive in there are gone. Now you're left with, like, again, let's say that you have picked, 14 or 15 early second round, and Steph and Cat and Sabonis are already off the board. That leaves you with Kyrie and KD were 2 of the positives I listed. Maxey and Dame were other positives. Or a bunch of kind of small negative guys like Anthony Edwards, Devin Booker, Harden, if you go earlier than that. It's tough, man. It's tough sledding. Fox, but if you took him a round earlier, then he would have been a pretty good size miss. So you just have to isolate the guys that you think could be a small win or a small loss and dodge the guys that you think have something very wrong with them. And I think that's probably the approach to the second round, which basically confirms the somewhat tongue-in-cheek Josh Lloydism we talked about at the beginning of the show, which is the second round after pick, I think we should even say after pick 8 this year, but there's a different cutoff every year. It might be pick 8, 9, 10, whatever. After pick 8 this year, you basically had 20 third rounders in a row. Your job was to pick 2 of them if you had to pick super late in the first round, or 1 of them if you had to pick earlier in the first round, that weren't 4th, 5th, and 6th rounders. Get the third rounders. Be satisfied with third round value out of your second round pick and dodge the 6th round or 5th and 6th round guys, and your team will be okay. And that is the lesson from today's show. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. I don't know what we're going to do tomorrow. We might pivot over to the totals side. There's some other kind of miscellaneous shows that we haven't done yet. I'd like to go through my buckets from the beginning of the season and see how most of those guys did. We already talked about some of the guys that were big misses, but I think it'd be fun. A full rehash on whatever I was doing. I kind of wanted to get through the Yahoo stuff first, but you guys might be sick of how dry this is. It's a dry week, but I'm getting full on boozed up at the end of it. I'm Dan Besbris for Old Man Squad Fantasy Basketball. Like, rate, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. So long for now.